A beautiful young explorer vanishes into a hidden tomb, only to awaken in a war-torn civilization from 400 BC. She's hunted by silent horsemen through shadowed jungles, faces she can't read, voices that don't belong to her time. Just when it seems like her fate is sealed, a stranger appears. But is he friend or something worse? Strange symbols, ancient power, and a man without a face. His glowing green eyes locked on hers. There's nowhere to run. Time itself bends. One wrong move and she's lost forever. What secrets lie in these ruins, and why was she chosen? I wasn't supposed to be alone that day. The team was still setting up camp on the ridge, but I couldn't wait. The ruins were calling me, half buried under layers of earth and time. My name's Camille, 24, archaeology grad student, raised in Utah, obsessed with ancient civilizations since I could read. So yeah, I climbed over that crumbled stone gate without a second thought. The air inside the burial site was dry and heavy. Carvings lined the walls, spirals, stars, a jaguar with a man's face. I took one step forward, and the floor shifted under my boot. A faint hum rose from below, not mechanical, more like chanting. I blinked. The walls started to shimmer. When I opened my eyes, I was no longer underground. I was standing in the middle of a forest, thick, humid, and alive with sounds I couldn't place. I turned, confused, and saw men on horseback wearing obsidian-painted armor. One of them shouted in a language I didn't understand. The others chased after me without hesitation. I ran. My lungs burned, sandals slipping in the mud. I barely dodged a net flung toward my face. A low branch sliced across my arm. But I kept running until the forest gave way to a rocky slope and I collapsed, half drenched in sweat and panic. That's when I met him. His name was Kale. A scar ran down his cheek and he held a carved talisman shaped like a bird. He didn't say much, just helped me up, handed me a flask, and told me in surprisingly clear English, "You're not supposed to be here." He brought me to a village. Stone huts, fires glowing inside. People stared. A woman named Taya touched my hair like I was a ghost. I think they believed I was some kind of omen. But before I could ask questions, the drums began. That night, I saw him, the one they called Vok. He stood on a stone platform just beyond the firelight. His face wasn't a face, it was bone. A white skull with nothing behind the eye sockets, two emerald lights burning deep where eyes should be. His voice cracked through the air like wind through dry leaves. He wanted me, not to kill, to use, to finish what the jaguar priests began centuries ago. Kale said he couldn't fight him alone, but he would try. He told me Vok had waited centuries for the right soul to step through the stone gate. I was the one, not chosen, just unlucky. At dawn we fled. Vok's whispers followed us in the trees. He moved through shadows, not footsteps. The forest turned cold when he came near. My breath would slow, my legs wouldn't move. Kale would drag me, whispering prayers in a language I couldn't name. I held onto his hand like it was the last real thing in the world. We reached a plateau where the stars bent unnaturally low. There was a circle of stones carved with the same jaguar symbols I'd seen back in New Mexico. Kale pressed my palm against the center one and told me to think of where I belonged. The last thing I saw was Vok standing at the edge of the stones, his two green lights flickering like flames in the dark. Then everything went quiet. It's strange how quickly fear becomes instinct. I don't remember deciding to run again, but when I woke in that cold morning fog, my feet were already moving. Kale had vanished. I was alone in a place I still couldn't name, under skies that looked too close. The jungle didn't whisper that day, it listened. I could feel something nearby, something old. There were markings carved into the trees, circles, serpents, shapes that twisted when I blinked. I walked faster, unsure where to go, just away from whatever watched. A rustle behind me, leaves trembling, no wind. I turned too quickly and tripped. Dirt filled my mouth. I didn't see her approach. She stepped from the trees, tall, dark braids wrapped in gold thread, face calm but wary. Her name was Yana. She spoke an older form of Spanish I barely understood, but her tone was clear. Danger was near. She helped me up, glanced behind us, and whispered one word, Vok. I didn't ask how she knew his name. I didn't ask why her hand was shaking. She led me to a ridge that overlooked a village built into cliffs. Smoke curled upward. I recognized none of it, yet it all felt like a memory. Children ran barefoot along ledges and men hauled baskets of dried roots, but no one smiled. Their eyes followed us. Then I saw it. Far below, the earth split into a deep canyon. At its base stood a figure, tall, motionless, a skull where a face should be. No movement, but I knew he saw me. That night, Kale returned. His robe was torn. He spoke with urgency, something about a passage, a rift, a second chance. Yana argued with him. I caught only pieces. Time breaks differently here. If we waited, it would seal again. Sleep came reluctantly. When I did sleep, it was full of sound, low chants, drums, thunder underwater. I woke up gasping. A breeze brushed my skin, but the air was still. Yana was gone. Kale grabbed my hand. We needed to go. Now. Through the jungle again, but this time the shadows moved. We weren't alone. I saw figures, pale shapes sliding behind trunks never fully seen. I heard breathing that wasn't mine. Kale muttered a prayer, his voice breaking. I felt it before I saw him. Vok was near. The birds stopped. The trees leaned away. He stepped from behind a twisted cedar, tall and silent. His green eyes burned, not with rage but hunger. He raised his hand slowly. He didn't need to run. He knew the forest bent for him. Kale pulled me and shouted something I didn't hear. I just ran. The trees grew denser. I scraped my arms, legs. I didn't care. I only cared about the thudding heartbeat in my ears. Kale said we were close. We reached a small clearing. Stones lay in a spiral, etched with the same jaguar I had seen in the tomb. Kale dropped to his knees and traced the symbol. I stood frozen. A wind rose. Leaves spun upward in a silent spiral. Then a voice, not spoken, heard in my chest. Return. I stepped into the circle. Light pulsed underfoot. Kale looked at me, not as a friend, not even as a savior. Just tired. You must go. Vok stood just beyond the edge of the light, unmoving. I closed my eyes. When I opened them, I was back in the tomb. Dust in my lungs, silence. My watch read 9:03 a.m. The others hadn't arrived yet, but something had changed. On my wrist was a thin thread of golden braid. I never told anyone the full story. They wouldn't believe me. But sometimes at night, I wake to the sound of drums, and I swear the walls hum. The sun in this place never looked right. Too golden, too still. I remember thinking that when we crossed the Valley of Stones, Kale said we'd be safe there, that the ruins were neutral ground. But I didn't feel safe. I hadn't felt safe since the moment I first saw that flicker of green light behind the trees. The village we found was nothing like the one before. Fewer people, older faces. Their leader was a man named Orin. He wore a thick robe made of bark fiber and feathers. His voice was calm, but his eyes never left mine. He asked where I had come from. Kale tried to explain, but Orin shook his head. They already knew. They had seen me in dreams. One of the elders, a woman named Maya, brought me a carved pendant. It looked like a sun trapped inside a wave. She placed it in my hand and told me I was drifting between tides. That if I stayed too long, I would be forgotten by both worlds. That night I dreamed of home, but everything was underwater. My street, my car, even my bedroom floating silently in a sea of blue. I woke up gasping, the pendant still in my hand. Kale said it was time to move again. The sky darkened early that day. Thick clouds pressed low against the jungle canopy. The birds vanished. Orin said the dead would walk near the river stones by nightfall. I didn't ask what that meant. We packed quietly. Maya handed me a pouch of herbs. For the breath, she said. I didn't ask what that meant either. We crossed a wide clearing just before dusk. The trees opened up, and for a brief second I felt something lift. I turned to thank Kale, but his face had gone pale. Ahead of us stood a man, or what looked like one. He wore no robe, no paint. His skin was tight against bone, gray as ash. His mouth stretched too wide, and where his eyes should have been, two red lights flickered faintly. It wasn't Vok, it was something else. Kale stepped forward, shielding me slightly. He called it a shadowling, not born, not dead. Left behind when a soul is taken too fast. It didn't speak, it moved. We ran. Branches slapped at my face, roots twisted underfoot. Kale kept his pace steady, guiding me toward the cliffs. The shadowling was behind us, silent but always close. I didn't dare look back. We reached a narrow ledge. Wind roared up from below. Kale took my hand and led me along the rock wall. Every step felt like it would be my last. But the shadowling didn't follow. It waited. I turned once and saw it watching from the tree line, head tilted slightly. The red lights in its face pulsed gently, like breathing. We found shelter inside a small cave that night. Kale lit a fire, though I wasn't sure how. The cave smelled of dust and something sweet, like dried fruit and smoke. He told me stories then, of when the sky split open, of when Vok first arrived, of the offerings made to keep him asleep. I asked what would happen if I never found a way back. He didn't answer, just stared into the fire. I think he already knew. When I woke the next morning, Kale was gone, again, but someone else was there. A girl, maybe my age, barefoot, wearing something like a tunic made of woven reeds. She didn't speak, just reached into her satchel and pulled out a small stone tablet. She placed it in my lap and pointed to the symbol at the center. The jaguar again, but this time it had wings. She pointed to the cave wall. Faint carvings glowed softly, the same shape over and over: flight, return, water, fire. I traced the shapes with my fingers. The stone in my hand began to warm. Outside, the wind picked up again. That same hum returned, low and steady. I stood slowly. The girl was gone. The tablet, however, remained warm. As I stepped out into the morning sun, I realized something had shifted. The forest no longer felt foreign. It felt like it was watching me differently. Not with hunger, but with memory. I used to think fear was loud, that it came in screams, running, chaos. But that morning, as I walked alone through the rising mist, fear was quiet. It sat on my shoulders, gentle and cold. Each step I took echoed, not because of the sound, but because something behind me walked exactly the same way. The girl in reeds had left no footprints. I checked, over and over. The tablet was still warm, tucked inside the cloth pouch I'd wrapped around my waist. The markings on the cave wall had faded when I looked back. It felt like they were only meant to be seen once. By mid-morning, I found Kale again. He was standing beside a river so clear I could see fish drifting under the surface. His hands were in the water, cupped like he was trying to hear it speak. He didn't look up when I arrived. I sat beside him. For a while, neither of us said anything. Finally, he whispered that Vok was growing stronger, that the veil between places had thinned. He said it the way someone says a storm is coming. No panic, just truth. Later, we followed the river upstream toward the stone cliffs. The jungle opened into a flat basin filled with smooth rocks and pale trees. In the center stood a structure I hadn't seen before, low, wide, carved into the earth itself. The entrance was shaped like an open mouth. Kale didn't want to go in, but something in me pulled forward, the same pull I'd felt that first day in New Mexico. Inside, the air changed. The light dimmed, but there was no roof. The sky above looked the same, but it felt farther away. We walked slowly. There were murals here, faded but still alive in their color. They showed people with wings on their backs, fleeing something below them. At the end of the chamber was a raised stone covered in moss. Kale brushed it off. Underneath was a map. Not of lands, of time. It curved inward. At the center was a mark I recognized, the jaguar. Kale placed the pendant Maya had given me onto the center mark. The stone shifted, and a low hum rose around us. A glow came from the stone map, lines tracing paths outward, like veins of fire under skin. Then they stopped. Everything went still. Then a voice echoed, not out loud but behind my thoughts. "You are close." The light snapped off. We weren't alone. A second presence entered the chamber, not a figure, a pressure. Kale turned to me, his jaw tight. We had to leave, but I couldn't move. My feet were locked to the floor. A shadow passed over the open sky above. Fast, silent. Kale touched my arm and pulled me gently. The spell broke. We ran. The jungle outside felt different. The trees were wrong, bent forward, like they had leaned to hear something. The sun was gone, even though it wasn't yet noon. We reached a ridge. Below us, the village Oren had taken us to was quiet. Too quiet. Smoke rose from the center hut. Kale said we had to keep going. There was a place deeper in the mountains where Vok's reach couldn't follow. A rift, barely open, but real. If I could step through it, I might return. We moved quickly, not resting. The jungle fought us this time. Thorns, thick brush, unexpected drops. I slipped more than once. Kale caught me each time without a word. We found the rift 2 days later. It wasn't dramatic, just a circle of stone, worn and broken, surrounded by carvings that buzzed faintly in my ears. I stepped inside. The world tilted. I closed my eyes. When I opened them, I was in the lab tent, sitting on a crate, soil still under my nails. The tomb hadn't even been opened yet. The sun outside was rising, but in my hand was the stone tablet, still warm. I told myself I wouldn't go back, that what happened in the tomb was a fluke, some trick of time, a fever dream wrapped in dirt and heat. But the tablet wouldn't cool. It stayed warm for days. The warmth didn't burn, but it throbbed like a heartbeat, like something was waiting. Back at camp, the others didn't notice much. My bag was where I left it. No one asked about my absence. No one even seemed to remember I had wandered. It was as if time had rewound slightly, just enough to cover the edges. I tried to sleep, but the dreams returned. Not memories, not visions, just the sound of water moving backwards, and always the same face at the edge. Green light, still as glass. 3 days after I returned, someone new arrived. Her name was Imari, a researcher from Oaxaca working on her doctorate. She was sharp, warm, and easy to talk to. But on the second night, she pulled me aside and said something that froze my chest. "Have you seen the mark?" I didn't answer, but she knew. She showed me a thin scar on her shoulder, shaped exactly like the jaguar symbol. She said she had found it after a dig last spring. Said she started hearing things, a whisper in languages she didn't speak. And sometimes, she said, shadows followed her, even in daylight. We stayed up talking. She believed the tomb wasn't just burial. It was a seal, a gateway between this world and another layered beneath it. Not hell, not heaven, something older, something neither. The next morning, the valley turned quiet, birds gone, wind dead. Our team leader Milo said a storm might be coming, but there were no clouds. I found Imari standing at the edge of the riverbank, her feet half in the water. She didn't turn when I spoke. Her voice came out slow, distant. "It's calling again." I looked down. Her reflection in the water didn't match her movements. It blinked when she didn't. It smiled when she didn't. She stepped back and whispered, "Not here." We left the site that afternoon. No explanation. We packed quietly. Imari kept her tablet close to her chest. I didn't know if hers was warm too. I didn't ask. We hiked to an overlook away from camp. The air felt thinner, trees older. The sky above us shimmered like heat on pavement. Imari placed her tablet on a stone. I did the same. The ground pulsed once, then again. The two stones began to glow. A soft hum filled the clearing. Then silence. Then the wind spoke. I couldn't explain the sound if I tried. It was words I shouldn't know but somehow did. Not instructions, not prophecy, just a simple truth. You are not from here, but you are bound to it. Imari reached out. I took her hand. Behind us, the jungle moved. Not with animals, with presence. We didn't turn around. We didn't need to. We felt him arrive, and somehow I think he was waiting too. We didn't speak on the walk back. Imari kept glancing behind us, not like she was afraid, but like she was counting how far back something stayed. I could feel it too. That sense of being followed not by a person, but by a memory waiting to turn solid. At camp, the wind had changed. The air felt brittle. People moved slower, like sleepwalkers. Milo tried to make conversation, but forgot what he was saying halfway through. The others laughed, but there was a hollowness in the sound. Later that evening, I found Imari standing near the storage tent, holding a small mirror in her hand. She told me her reflection had started to shift. Not dramatically, not every time, but sometimes her lips didn't move when she spoke. Sometimes her eyes blinked twice as fast. She said the thing we felt near the overlook wasn't Vok. She said it was older. That night, I heard something breathing near my tent. I stayed still. The breath was steady, patient. It never touched the tent, just hovered near as if it was listening. In the morning, Milo was gone. His boots were still by the fire. His journal was open to a blank page. We searched, but no one found tracks. Imari looked at me and said we should go back to the tomb. We did. The air inside felt heavier. The dust didn't settle the way it used to. It clung to the light, made it bend. We passed the same murals, the same spiral carvings, but something new had been added. A symbol scratched fresh into the stone. One we hadn't seen before. It looked like an eye closed halfway. Behind it, faint and smeared, a fingerprint. We didn't speak. Back at the entrance, we saw a new figure. A man, older, thin, dressed in expedition gear, too clean for this place. He introduced himself as Ulrich, a linguist working from the northern dig. He said he'd been hearing strange reports, that our valley had gone quiet on the radios, that something was interfering with time logs and notes. He wasn't with any official crew. Imari asked him why he really came. He smiled but didn't answer. He joined us anyway. That night, we made camp near the edge of the cliffs, where the stone rift had once flickered. The glow was gone now, but the air still buzzed with something beneath it. Ulrich sat by the fire and hummed an old tune. It wasn't a song I knew, but it made my stomach twist. Amari watched him closely. She whispered that his accent didn't match any region nearby, that the language he claimed to study hadn't been used in centuries. And then she asked the question I hadn't dared ask. What if he never left? What if he's been here all along? I couldn't sleep. At some point during the night, I heard footsteps in the leaves. Not sneaky, deliberate. I stepped out of the tent. Ulrich was gone. His bedroll was neatly folded, but the fire was still warm. In the ash were prints, not feet, hands, large, crawling. The next morning, we left camp again. We didn't talk about it, but neither of us mentioned going home.